The dust kicked up behind Jake Morrison's horse as he rode down the main street of Cedar Gulch. The sun was getting low in the sky, painting everything orange and red. Jake had been riding for most of the day, and both he and his horse were tired. His back ached from the long ride, and his throat felt dry as old leather. Jake was a tall man with wide shoulders and rough hands. His face was brown from years in the sun, and his hair was the color of wheat. He wore simple clothes, brown pants, a blue shirt, and a black hat that had seen better days. On his hip hung a gun that he hoped he would never have to use. It had been 3 weeks since Jake had seen another person. He lived alone on his ranch far from town. His only company was his cattle and his horse. Sometimes he talked to them just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. The loneliness sat on his chest like a heavy stone, but he had learned to live with it. Jake's saddlebags were full of money from selling his cattle. It was good money, enough to buy supplies for the winter and maybe some new tools. He had worked hard for this money, getting up before dawn every day to take care of his animals. Now he could buy what he needed and head back home. As Jake rode through the town, he noticed something was wrong. Cedar Gulch had always been a small town, but now it looked almost empty. Several shops had boards nailed across their windows. Signs that said "for sale" hung in front of buildings that used to be busy. The few people he saw on the wooden sidewalks looked worried and moved quickly, not stopping to talk to each other like they used to. Jake remembered when Cedar Gulch was full of life. Children used to play in the streets while their mothers hung clothes on lines. Men would gather outside the saloon to talk about weather and crops. Women would chat as they shopped for food and cloth. But now the town felt sad and quiet, like everyone had forgotten how to smile. He tied his horse to a post outside Miller's general store. The horse was happy to stop and rest. Jake gave the animal a gentle pat on the neck. "We'll get some oats for you too, old friend," he said softly. The horse made a low sound and shook his head as if he understood. Jake stretched his arms and legs. Riding for hours made his muscles stiff. He looked around the town one more time before going into the store. A dog walked slowly down the street, looking thin and hungry. An old man sat on a chair outside the barber shop, but he didn't look up when Jake passed by. Everything felt different from the last time Jake had visited. The general store was the biggest building on Main Street. It had a wide front porch with barrels and boxes stacked outside. A sign above the door said, "Miller's General Store, everything you need." But even this sign looked old and faded now. Jake pushed open the door, and a bell rang above his head. The sound echoed in the quiet store. Inside, shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. They held cans of food, tools, cloth, medicine, and everything else people needed to live. But Jake noticed that many of the shelves looked empty. Where there used to be rows of cans and bags, now there were big gaps. Mr. Miller stood behind the counter. He was a short, fat man with gray hair and small eyes. He had always been friendly to Jake before, but now he looked tired and worried. When he saw Jake, he tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Jake Morrison," Mr. Miller said. "Good to see you. How's the ranch?" "Doing well," Jake replied. "Sold my cattle for a good price. Need to stock up for winter." Mr. Miller nodded, but he still looked worried. "Times have been hard here in town. Lost a lot of customers. Some folks can't pay what they owe me." Jake looked around the store again. Now he understood why so many shelves were empty. If people couldn't pay, Mr. Miller couldn't buy new things to sell. It was like a circle that kept getting smaller and smaller. "What happened?" Jake asked. "Last time I was here, everything seemed fine." Mr. Miller's face got dark. "The bank," he said quietly. "Someone stole money from the bank. Lots of money. Now people don't trust anyone. They're scared to spend what little they have. Businesses are closing. Families are leaving town." Jake felt sorry for the people of Cedar Gulch. He was lucky to live on his ranch away from all this trouble. He could grow his own food and take care of himself. But people in town needed jobs and shops to survive. Without them, the town would die. "I'm sorry to hear that," Jake said. "I'll take what I need and pay cash." Mr. Miller's face brightened a little. "That would be good. Real good. What do you need?" Jake began to list the things he needed for winter. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, beans, and rice. Tools to fix things around the ranch. Warm clothes for the cold months. Medicine in case he got sick. Bullets for his gun in case wolves came around his cattle. As Mr. Miller gathered the items, Jake noticed how quiet the town was outside. No children laughing. No horses moving up and down the street. No sound of hammers as men worked on buildings. Just silence, heavy and sad. Jake knew he would go back to his ranch soon. He would be alone again, but at least he would be safe. The people of Cedar Gulch were not so lucky. They were trapped in a dying town, watching their world fall apart around them. Jake wished he could help them, but he didn't know how. The sun was getting lower and soon it would be dark. Jake wanted to finish his business and find a place to sleep for the night. Tomorrow he would start the long ride home to his ranch, where only the wind and his animals would keep him company. Jake was putting his supplies in his saddlebags when he heard a woman's voice outside the store. It was soft but desperate, like someone asking for help. He looked through the window and saw something that made him stop what he was doing. A young woman stood near the store's front steps. She wore a white dress that had once been beautiful, but now it was dirty and torn. The dress was long and fancy, like the kind women wore to get married. Her brown hair hung loose around her face and her green eyes looked scared and tired. The woman was talking to Mr. Miller, who had stepped outside. In her hands she held a crumpled piece of paper. Jake could see her hands shaking as she spoke. "Please, Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice was quiet, but Jake could hear every word. "I just need one loaf of bread. I haven't eaten in 2 days. I can pay you back when I find work." Mr. Miller crossed his arms and shook his head. "Sarah Elizabeth, I already told you. I can't give credit to anyone right now. Too many people owe me money already. I got my own family to feed." The woman named Sarah Elizabeth looked like she might cry, but she held her head up high. "I'm not asking for much. Just enough food to keep me alive. I'll work for you. I'll clean your store or help your wife with anything she needs." "Nobody wants to hire you," Mr. Miller said, his voice getting harder. "Not after what happened. People blame you for all the trouble. You brought shame to this town." Jake didn't understand what Mr. Miller meant, but he could see that Sarah Elizabeth was in real trouble. She was thin, too thin. Her face was pale, like she hadn't been eating well for a long time. The wedding dress hung loose on her small body. "That's not fair," Sarah Elizabeth said, her voice getting stronger. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not the one who stole the money." "Maybe not," Mr. Miller replied. "But you're the reason he ran away. If you had kept your mouth shut and married him like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. He didn't know the whole story, but he knew it was wrong for a man to refuse food to a hungry woman. He had been raised to help people who needed help, especially women who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah Elizabeth looked down at the paper in her hands. Jake could see it was some kind of letter or notice. Her shoulders started to shake, but she didn't cry. She was trying to be strong, but Jake could see she was at the end of her rope. "Please," she whispered one more time. "I'm begging you." Mr. Miller turned his back on her. "I can't help you, Sarah Elizabeth. Find someone else." He started to walk back into the store. That was when Jake stepped outside. His boots made loud sounds on the wooden porch as he walked toward them. Both Mr. Miller and Sarah Elizabeth looked up at him. "What's the problem here?" Jake asked. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Mr. Miller looked uncomfortable. "No problem, Jake. Just finishing up some business." Jake looked at Sarah Elizabeth. Up close, he could see that she had once been very pretty. She still was pretty, but hunger and worry had made her face thin and her eyes hollow. She was probably about 25 years old, maybe younger. The wedding dress told a story, but Jake didn't know what it was yet. "Ma'am," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat. "My name is Jake Morrison. Are you in need of help?" Sarah Elizabeth looked at him with surprise. Most people in town had been treating her badly, but this stranger was being kind. She didn't know what to say. "She needs food," Jake said to Mr. Miller. "Give her a loaf of bread and put it on my bill." Mr. Miller looked worried. "Jake, you don't understand the situation here. This woman has caused a lot of trouble for our town." "I don't care about that," Jake said firmly. "She's hungry and I have money. Give her the bread." Sarah Elizabeth stared at Jake like she couldn't believe what was happening. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "You don't even know me." Jake looked into her green eyes. He saw pain there and fear, but also something else. Pride. This woman had pride even when she had nothing else. That told him something important about who she was. "Maybe not," Jake said, "but I know what it's like to be hungry. And I know it's not right to let someone go without food when I can help." Mr. Miller sighed and went back into the store. He came out a few minutes later with a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. He handed it to Sarah Elizabeth without looking at her. "Thank you." Sarah Elizabeth whispered to Jake. Her eyes filled with tears, but she still didn't cry. Jake paid Mr. Miller for the bread and for his own supplies. The store owner took the money quickly and went back inside, clearly wanting to avoid any more trouble. Jake and Sarah Elizabeth stood alone on the porch. The sun was almost gone now and the street was getting dark. A few oil lamps were starting to glow in windows around the town. "Thank you," Sarah Elizabeth said again. "I don't know how to repay you." Jake studied her face. There was a story here, and he found himself wanting to know what it was. This woman in her torn wedding dress, hungry and alone in a town that seemed to hate her. What had happened to bring her to this point? "Have you eaten anything today?" Jake asked. Sarah Elizabeth shook her head. "Not today. Not yesterday either." Jake made a decision. "There's a small diner down the street. Come with me. Let's get you a proper meal." Sarah Elizabeth looked shocked. "You've already done too much. I can't ask you to spend more money on me." "You didn't ask," Jake said simply. "I'm offering." He could see her fighting with herself. She wanted to say yes, she needed to say yes, but her pride was making it hard. Finally, hunger won over pride. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." As they walked down the street toward the diner, Jake noticed how people looked at them. Some stared openly. Others quickly looked away. A few women whispered to each other behind their hands. Whatever had happened with Sarah Elizabeth, the whole town knew about it. Jake didn't care what people thought. He had learned long ago that small towns could be cruel places where gossip was more important than kindness. This woman needed help and he was going to help her. It was as simple as that. The diner was small and warm with only a few tables. The owner, an older woman with gray hair, looked surprised when Jake and Sarah Elizabeth walked in together. She seated them at a table in the corner away from the other customers. "What can I get you?" the woman asked Jake, but she kept looking at Sarah Elizabeth with curious eyes. "2 plates of whatever you're cooking tonight," Jake said, "and coffee." As they waited for their food, Jake wondered what he was getting himself into. He had come to town for supplies, not to rescue a mysterious woman in a wedding dress. But something about Sarah Elizabeth made him want to help her. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be alone in the world. The food came quickly. Sarah Elizabeth stared at the plate like she couldn't believe it was real. There was meat, potatoes, beans, and fresh bread. Steam rose from the hot food and Jake could hear her stomach make hungry sounds. "Go ahead," Jake said gently. "Eat." Sarah Elizabeth picked up her fork with shaking hands. She took a small bite, then another. Soon she was eating faster, like she was afraid someone might take the food away. Jake ate his own meal slowly, watching her. He had never seen someone so grateful for simple food. The diner owner brought them coffee in thick white cups. The coffee was hot and strong, and Jake saw Sarah Elizabeth relax a little as she drank it. Some color started to come back to her pale face. "Better?" Jake asked. Sarah Elizabeth nodded. "Much better. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Morrison." "Just Jake," he said, "and you don't have to thank me. But I am curious about something. That dress you're wearing, it's a wedding dress, isn't it?" Sarah Elizabeth looked down at her torn dress. Her face got sad again. "Yes, it was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the worst." Jake waited. He had learned that sometimes people needed time to tell their stories. He drank his coffee and let the silence stretch between them. "I was supposed to marry Thomas Whitmore," Sarah Elizabeth finally said. Her voice was quiet, like she was telling a secret. "His father owns the bank here in town. Thomas was his only son. Everyone said I was lucky to marry into such an important family." She paused and took another sip of coffee. Her hands were steadier now. "The wedding was planned for 3 weeks ago. Everyone in town was invited. My family spent all their savings on this dress and the wedding party. I thought I was the luckiest girl in Cedar Gulch." Jake could hear the pain in her voice. Whatever had happened, it had hurt her deeply. "What went wrong?" he asked softly. Sarah Elizabeth's green eyes filled with tears, but she still didn't let them fall. "The morning of the wedding, I went to the bank to surprise Thomas. I wanted to give him a gift before the ceremony. But when I got there, I heard him talking to another man. They didn't know I was listening." She stopped eating and put her fork down. Her hands were shaking again. Thomas was telling this man that he needed more time. He said he had taken money from the bank to pay his gambling debts. He owed money to dangerous people in the next town over. He had been stealing from his own father's bank for months. Jake felt his anger rising again. He had known men like Thomas before. Men who took what didn't belong to them and let other people pay the price. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, Sarah Elizabeth continued. The man Thomas was talking to said he would hurt Thomas if he didn't pay soon. Thomas was scared. He said he would take more money from the bank after the wedding, when his father trusted him completely. Sarah Elizabeth picked up her coffee cup with both hands to stop them from shaking. I stood there in my wedding dress, listening to my future husband plan to steal more money. I realized I didn't know him at all. The man I thought I loved was a thief and a liar. "What did you do?" Jake asked. "I walked into the room," Sarah Elizabeth said, her voice getting stronger. "I told Thomas I had heard everything. I said I couldn't marry a man who would steal from his own family. I gave him back his ring and told him the wedding was over." Jake could picture the scene. A young woman in a white dress facing down a man who had betrayed everyone who trusted him. Thomas got angry, Sarah Elizabeth went on. He said I was making a mistake. He said no one would believe me if I told them what I had heard. He said I was just a poor girl who should be grateful he wanted to marry me at all. "But you told people anyway," Jake guessed. Sarah Elizabeth nodded. "I went straight to his father, Mr. Whitmore. I told him what Thomas had said. At first he didn't want to believe me, but when he checked the bank records, he found that money was missing. A lot of money." She took a deep breath before continuing. Mr. Whitmore was heartbroken. He called the sheriff, but it was too late. Thomas had already run away. He took whatever money he could carry and left town that same day. No one has seen him since. Now Jake understood why the people of Cedar Gulch were treating Sarah Elizabeth so badly. In their minds, she was the reason their bank had been robbed and their town was falling apart. "People blame you," Jake said. "Yes," Sarah Elizabeth replied bitterly. "They say if I had married Thomas as planned, he never would have run away. They think I should have kept quiet about the stealing. Some people even think I was working with Thomas, that I helped him plan the whole thing." "That's crazy," Jake said. "You stopped him from stealing more money." "Try telling that to people who have lost everything," Sarah Elizabeth said. "The bank is nearly broke because of what Thomas did. People can't get their money out. Businesses are closing because no one has cash to spend. Families are leaving town because there's no work." Sarah Elizabeth looked around the nearly empty diner. "My own family blames me too," she whispered. "They spent all their money on the wedding. Now they're embarrassed and angry. They told me I should leave town and never come back." Jake felt sorry for this brave woman who had tried to do the right thing and was being punished for it. She had chosen honesty over comfort, truth over an easy life. Now she was paying a terrible price. "Where have you been staying?" Jake asked. "In the old barn behind the church," Sarah Elizabeth admitted. "The pastor's wife takes pity on me sometimes and gives me water to wash with. But mostly I just hide and try to stay out of people's way." Jake couldn't imagine living like that, sleeping in a barn, begging for food, being hated by everyone in town for something that wasn't her fault. "You can't keep living like this," he said. Sarah Elizabeth looked at him with tired eyes. "I don't have any choice. No one will hire me. No one will help me. I have no money and nowhere to go. I've been thinking about walking to the next town, but it's 50 miles away and I don't know anyone there either." Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. The words came out of his mouth before he had time to think about them. "Come with me," he said. Sarah Elizabeth stared at him. "What?" "Come with me to my ranch," Jake said, the idea becoming clearer as he spoke. "I live alone. I have a good house, plenty of food, and no neighbors to gossip about you. You'd be safe there." Sarah Elizabeth looked shocked. "I can't do that. You don't even know me. Why would you want to help a stranger?" Jake thought about his lonely ranch, his empty house, his quiet meals by himself. He thought about this woman sleeping in a barn because she had been brave enough to tell the truth. "Maybe because we're both alone," he said simply. "Maybe we can help each other." Sarah Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Jake could see her thinking, weighing her options. Finally, she looked up at him. "What would people say?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "I don't care what people say, do you?" Sarah Elizabeth almost smiled for the first time since Jake had met her. "I guess I've already learned that people will say whatever they want to say, whether it's true or not." "So what do you think?" Jake asked. Sarah Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I think," she said slowly, "that you might be the kindest man I've ever met. And I think I don't have any other choice." Jake nodded. "We'll leave first thing in the morning. Pack whatever you have." "I don't have anything to pack," Sarah Elizabeth said quietly. Jake realized she was telling the truth. Everything she owned was probably the torn wedding dress she was wearing. "We'll figure it out," he said. "First, let's get you a room at the hotel for tonight. Tomorrow we start over." Jake woke up early the next morning, just like he always did. The sun was barely showing over the hills, and the air was cool and fresh. He had slept in the small hotel room, but his sleep had been restless. He kept thinking about the decision he had made the night before. Had he done the right thing? He barely knew Sarah Elizabeth, yet he had invited her to come live on his ranch. It was crazy when he thought about it. But something about her had touched his heart. Maybe it was her courage, or maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be alone in the world. Jake got dressed and went downstairs to the hotel lobby. The old man behind the desk was already awake reading a newspaper. "Morning," Jake said. "Morning," the man replied. "You checking out today?" "Yes, and the lady in room 12 as well." The hotel man looked at Jake with curious eyes but didn't ask any questions. In a small town like Cedar Gulch, everyone minded everyone else's business, but sometimes it was better to stay quiet. Jake walked outside and checked on his horse. The animal looked rested and ready to travel. Jake gave him some oats and fresh water. "We're going home today, boy," he said softly. "And we're bringing someone with us." A few minutes later, Sarah Elizabeth came downstairs. She still wore the same torn wedding dress because it was the only dress she had, but she had washed her face and brushed her hair, and she looked a little better than she had the night before. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Morning," Jake replied. "Did you sleep well?" Sarah Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Better than I have in weeks. A real bed feels like heaven when you've been sleeping on hay." They walked together to Miller's General Store. Jake wanted to buy Sarah Elizabeth some proper clothes before they started the long journey to his ranch. A wedding dress was not good for riding horses or living on a farm. Mr. Miller looked surprised when they came into his store together. Word had probably already spread around town that Jake had helped Sarah Elizabeth and paid for her hotel room. In a place like Cedar Gulch, news traveled fast. "What can I do for you, Jake?" Mr. Miller asked, trying to sound friendly. "The lady needs traveling clothes," Jake said simply. "A dress that's good for riding. And boots. And a warm coat." Mr. Miller showed them to a corner of the store where he kept women's clothes. There weren't many choices, but there was a simple brown dress that looked like it would fit Sarah Elizabeth. There were also sturdy boots and a thick wool coat. Sarah Elizabeth looked at the prices on the clothes and shook her head. "This is too much," she whispered to Jake. "I can't let you spend all this money on me." "You need proper clothes," Jake said. "You can't ride to my ranch in a wedding dress." "But I don't know how I'll ever pay you back," Sarah Elizabeth said. Jake looked into her worried green eyes. "We'll figure that out later. Right now you need these things." Sarah Elizabeth went behind a curtain to try on the dress. When she came out, Jake saw that she looked completely different. The brown dress was simple, but it fit her well. She looked like a woman who could work hard and take care of herself. The torn wedding dress was left behind the curtain like a bad memory. Jake paid Mr. Miller for the clothes. The store owner took the money, but he still looked uncomfortable. Jake could tell that Mr. Miller disapproved of what Jake was doing, but he was too polite to say anything. As they left the store, Sarah Elizabeth stopped walking. "Jake," she said seriously, "I need to say something before we go any further." Jake stopped and looked at her. She looked nervous but determined. "You're being very kind to me," she said, "kinder than anyone has been in weeks. But I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a husband. I know it might seem strange for me to come to your ranch, but I don't want you to think that I expect anything romantic from you." Jake felt his face get warm. He hadn't really thought about that part of the situation. "I understand," he said. "I'm not looking for a wife either. I just thought we could help each other out. You need a safe place to live, and I could use some help around the ranch." Sarah Elizabeth looked relieved. "Good, I'm glad we understand each other. After what happened with Thomas, I'm not sure I'll ever trust another man enough to marry him." "That's fine with me," Jake said. "We'll just be two people helping each other survive. Nothing more." But even as he said the words, Jake wondered if it would really be that simple. Sarah Elizabeth was a beautiful woman, and he was a lonely man. Would they really be able to live together without any romantic feelings developing? They walked to where Jake's horse was waiting. Jake had bought a second horse from the stable owner so that Sarah Elizabeth would have something to ride. It was an old mare, gentle and easy to handle. "Have you ever ridden a horse before?" Jake asked. "A few times when I was younger," Sarah Elizabeth said, "but not very well." Jake showed her how to put her foot in the stirrup and swing her leg over the saddle. The horse stood very still, like she understood that her new rider was nervous. Sarah Elizabeth sat carefully on the horse's back, holding the reins with both hands. "She's a good horse," Jake said. "She won't give you any trouble." Jake climbed onto his own horse and led the way out of town. As they rode down Main Street, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Some of them looked angry. Others looked curious. A few women shook their heads in disapproval. Sarah Elizabeth kept her eyes straight ahead. Jake could tell she was embarrassed by all the attention. But she held her head high. She was not going to let these people see her cry. When they reached the edge of town, Jake looked back one last time. Cedar Gulch looked small and sad in the morning light. He was glad to be leaving it behind. "Are you all right?" he asked Sarah Elizabeth. She took a deep breath of the clean country air. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm happy to be leaving this place. I thought it was my home, but homes are supposed to be where people care about you. The people in Cedar Gulch stopped caring about me the day I told the truth about Thomas." They rode in silence for a while. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the air grew warmer. Around them, the countryside was beautiful. Rolling hills covered with grass stretched as far as they could see. Wild flowers grew along the sides of the dirt road. Birds sang in the trees. Jake watched Sarah Elizabeth as she rode. She was getting more comfortable on the horse, sitting straighter and not holding the reins so tightly. She looked around at the scenery like she had never seen such pretty country before. "It's beautiful out here," she said. "Wait until you see my ranch," Jake said. "It's in a valley surrounded by hills. There's a stream that runs right through the middle of it, and the grass is green even in summer." "How long have you lived there?" Sarah Elizabeth asked. 5 years, Jake replied. "My parents died in a sickness that came through the area. They left me the ranch and everything on it. I've been alone there ever since." "That must be lonely," Sarah Elizabeth said softly. Jake nodded. "It is, but I got used to it. I had my work to keep me busy, and I told myself I didn't need anyone else." "But you do need people," Sarah Elizabeth said. "Everyone does. That's what makes us human." Jake looked at her with surprise. She was right, of course. He did need people. He just hadn't admitted it to himself until now. "What about you?" Jake asked. "What was your life like before all this happened?" Sarah Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "I lived with my parents in town. My father worked at the grain store. My mother took in sewing to make extra money. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I helped my mother with her sewing and dreamed about getting married and having children of my own." Her voice got sad again. "I thought Thomas was a good man. He was handsome and polite, and his family had money. I thought I was going to have a wonderful life with him. I never imagined he was stealing money and lying to everyone." "It's not your fault that he fooled you," Jake said. "Some people are very good at pretending to be something they're not." "I know that in my head," Sarah Elizabeth said. "But in my heart I feel stupid for believing him. How could I not have known what kind of person he really was?" Jake didn't have an answer for that. He had never been in love, so he didn't know how it could make someone blind to the truth. But he could see that Sarah Elizabeth was still hurting from what Thomas had done to her. The sun was getting high now, and both horses were starting to sweat. Jake knew they would need to rest soon and let the animals drink water. There was a small stream about a mile ahead where they could stop. As they rode, Jake found himself stealing glances at Sarah Elizabeth. In the brown dress and boots, she looked different from the desperate woman he had met outside Miller's store. She looked stronger, more hopeful. Maybe leaving Cedar Gulch was exactly what she needed to start her life over. The first day of traveling was harder than Jake had expected. Sarah Elizabeth was not used to riding for long hours, and by afternoon she was in pain. Her back hurt from sitting in the saddle, and her legs were sore from gripping the horse. But she didn't complain. She just kept riding, her face getting more tired as the hours passed. They stopped several times to rest the horses and stretch their legs. During these breaks, Jake and Sarah Elizabeth didn't talk much. They were still strangers, and both of them felt awkward about the unusual situation they were in. When the sun started to set, Jake found a good place to make camp for the night. It was near a small stream, with trees that would give them shelter from the wind. He helped Sarah Elizabeth down from her horse, and she almost fell when her feet touched the ground. "My legs feel like they're made of wood," she said with a weak smile. You did well for your first long day of riding, Jake said. Tomorrow will be easier. Jake took care of the horses while Sarah Elizabeth sat by the stream. He could see that she was very tired, but she was trying not to show it. He admired her strength. Many women would have been crying and demanding to go back to town by now. Jake built a fire as the sky grew dark. He had brought food for the journey, dried meat, bread, and coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped in the grass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The stars are so bright out here, Sarah Elizabeth said, looking up at the sky. No buildings to block the view, Jake replied, and no oil lamps to make the sky look dim. I've never slept outside before, Sarah Elizabeth admitted. Is it safe? Safe enough, Jake said. I've got my gun if any wild animals come around, but mostly they stay away from people. Jake had brought 2 blankets. He gave one to Sarah Elizabeth and kept one for himself. He made sure she was sleeping close enough to the fire to stay warm, but far enough away that sparks wouldn't land on her blanket. Good night, Sarah Elizabeth said softly. Good night, Jake replied. Jake lay on his back, looking up at the stars. He could hear Sarah Elizabeth breathing nearby, and it was strange to have another person so close. For 5 years he had slept alone. Now there was someone else sharing his camp, someone who depended on him to keep her safe. He found himself thinking about the future. What would it be like to have Sarah Elizabeth living on his ranch? Would she be happy there, or would she get lonely and want to leave? Would they become friends, or would they always be just 2 strangers helping each other out? The next morning, Sarah Elizabeth could barely walk. Every muscle in her body hurt from the long day of riding. But she got back on her horse without complaining, and they continued their journey toward Jake's ranch. The second day was a little easier. Sarah Elizabeth seemed more comfortable on the horse, and she started to talk more. She asked Jake questions about his ranch and his life. Jake found himself enjoying her company. It had been a long time since he had anyone to talk to. What kind of animals do you have? Sarah Elizabeth asked as they rode through a valley filled with wildflowers. Cattle mostly, Jake said.
About 50 head?
And some chickens and pigs. I grow corn and vegetables too. Do you do all the work yourself? Yes, it keeps me busy. There's always something that needs to be done on a ranch. What will I do? Sarah Elizabeth asked. I don't know anything about ranch work. Jake had been thinking about this. There's plenty of work for someone who wants to help. The chickens need to be fed and their eggs collected. The vegetables need to be tended. The house needs to be cleaned and meals cooked. If you're willing to learn, I can teach you other things too. Sarah Elizabeth nodded. I'm willing to learn. I want to earn my keep. I don't want to be a burden to you. You won't be a burden, Jake said. I think it will be nice to have help with the work. And it will be good to have someone to talk to at meals. That afternoon, they came to a wide river. The water was moving fast, and Jake could see that Sarah Elizabeth was nervous about crossing it. Is it deep? She asked. Not too deep, Jake said. But the current is strong. Stay close to me and let your horse follow mine. They know how to cross rivers. Jake went into the water first. His horse stepped carefully, feeling for solid ground with each step. The water came up to the horse's belly, and Jake felt the current pushing against them. But his horse was strong and experienced, and they made it across safely. Sarah Elizabeth followed, but her horse was more nervous. Halfway across, the animal slipped on the muddy bottom and stumbled. Sarah Elizabeth let out a small scream as the horse went down on one knee. Jake quickly turned his horse around and rode back into the river. He grabbed the reins of Sarah Elizabeth's horse and helped steady the animal. Water had splashed up onto Sarah Elizabeth's dress, and she was shaking with fear. It's all right, Jake said calmly. You're safe. Just hold on tight. He led both horses to the other side of the river. When they reached dry land, Sarah Elizabeth slid down from her saddle. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. I was so scared, she said, her voice trembling. You did fine, Jake said. River crossings are always tricky. Even experienced riders have trouble sometimes. They stopped to rest and let their clothes dry in the sun. Sarah Elizabeth sat on a rock, still shaken by what had happened. Jake could see that she was trying to be brave, but the fear had scared her more than she wanted to admit. Thank you, she said quietly. If you hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened. That's what I'm here for, Jake said simply. To keep you safe. Something changed between them in that moment. The crossing of the river had made them partners in a way they hadn't been before. Jake had protected Sarah Elizabeth, and she had trusted him to keep her safe. It was a small thing, but it mattered. As they continued riding that afternoon, they talked more easily. Sarah Elizabeth told Jake about her life in Cedar Gulch, the friends she had lost, the family who had turned against her, the dreams that had been shattered when she learned the truth about Thomas. Jake found himself telling her about his parents, about the loneliness of living alone on the ranch, about the nights when he sat on his porch and wished he had someone to share his life with. "You're a good man." "Jake Morrison," Sarah Elizabeth said as the sun started to set on their second day of travel. "Thomas could have learned a lot from you." "Thomas made his choices," Jake replied. "Now we're making ours." That night they camped near a grove of oak trees. Sarah Elizabeth seemed less nervous about sleeping outside. She was getting used to the sounds of the night and the feel of hard ground beneath her blanket. "One more day," Jake said as they sat by the fire. "Tomorrow we'll reach the ranch." "I'm excited to see it," Sarah Elizabeth said. "And nervous too. This is going to be a whole new life for me." "For both of us," Jake said. "I've never shared my home with anyone before. It's going to take some getting used to." "We'll figure it out," Sarah Elizabeth said. "We're both reasonable people." "I think we can make this work." Jake hoped she was right. As he lay down to sleep that night, he realized that he was looking forward to showing Sarah Elizabeth his ranch. He was proud of what he had built there, and he wanted her to like it. He wanted her to think of it as home, but he also worried about what would happen when the reality of their situation set in. Living together on an isolated ranch was very different from traveling together on the road. Would they get along when they had to see each other every day? Would Sarah Elizabeth be happy living so far from other people? Would she decide to leave and go back to town? These questions kept Jake awake for a long time. Finally, he fell asleep to the sound of Sarah Elizabeth's quiet breathing and the crackling of the dying fire. On the third morning, Jake woke up feeling excited. Today they would reach his ranch, and Sarah Elizabeth would see her new home for the first time. He hoped she would like what she saw. Sarah Elizabeth seemed excited too. She was up early, helping Jake pack their blankets and put out the fire. Her face looked brighter than it had since he first met her outside Miller's store. "I can't wait to see your ranch," she said as they started riding. "Just a few more hours," Jake promised. As they rode through the morning, Jake began to recognize landmarks that meant they were getting close to home. There was the big rock that looked like a sleeping bear. There was the hill where wild roses grew every spring. There was the old oak tree where he sometimes stopped to rest when he was coming back from town. And then just after noon, they rode up a small hill, and Jake's ranch spread out before them in the valley below. Sarah Elizabeth stopped her horse at the top of the hill and stared down at Jake's ranch. Her mouth opened in surprise, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The ranch was more beautiful than she had imagined. The house was bigger than she had expected. A solid wooden building with a wide porch and real glass windows. Near the house stood a large red barn, and beyond that were fenced areas where cattle grazed on green grass. A clear stream ran through the middle of the property, with trees growing along its banks. "Jake," Sarah Elizabeth said softly, "it's wonderful. It's like something from a dream." Jake felt proud as he watched her face. He had worked hard to build this place, and it meant everything to him to see that she liked it. "Come on," he said. "Let's go down and I'll show you around." They rode down the hill toward the house. As they got closer, Sarah Elizabeth could see more details. There was a vegetable garden beside the house with neat rows of corn, beans, and squash. Chickens scratched in the dirt near a small coop. A few pigs rolled in the mud in their pen. "You've built something amazing here," Sarah Elizabeth said. "I can see why you love it." Jake helped her down from her horse. Sarah Elizabeth's legs were still sore from 3 days of riding, but she was too excited to care. She wanted to see everything. "This is the main house," Jake said, leading her up the steps to the porch. "My parents built it when they first came here. I've added on to it over the years." Jake opened the front door and Sarah Elizabeth stepped inside. The house was simple but comfortable. There was a large front room with a stone fireplace and handmade wooden furniture. The kitchen was small but well organized, with a wood-burning stove and shelves lined with dishes and pots. "There are 2 bedrooms," Jake said, showing her down a short hallway. "You can have this one." He opened a door to show her a small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the stream. Sarah Elizabeth walked to the window and looked out. The view was peaceful and pretty. She could see cattle drinking from the stream and birds flying among the trees. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." Jake showed her the rest of the house. There was another bedroom where he slept, and a small room where he kept his books and papers. Everything was clean and well kept, but Sarah Elizabeth could tell that it was the home of a man who lived alone. It needed a woman's touch. "I'll show you the rest of the ranch later," Jake said. "Right now you should rest. I know you're tired from the long trip." "I am tired," Sarah Elizabeth admitted, "but I'm also excited. I want to start helping right away," Jake smiled. "There's no rush. You need to get used to this place first. Tomorrow we can start showing you how everything works." That evening, Jake cooked dinner for both of them. It was simple food, fried meat, potatoes, and beans, but it was hot and filling. They ate at the small table in the kitchen, and for the first time since leaving Cedar Gulch, they felt truly relaxed. "Tell me about your parents," Sarah Elizabeth said as they ate. "What were they like?" Jake's face got soft when he talked about his parents. "They were good people, hard workers. My father was strong and quiet like a mountain. My mother was gentle but tough when she needed to be. They loved each other very much, and they loved this land. They would be proud of what you've done here," Sarah Elizabeth said. "I hope so," Jake replied. "They always said this valley was a special place. They wanted to build something here that would last for generations." After dinner, they sat on the front porch as the sun set behind the hills. The air was warm and still, and they could hear the gentle sound of the stream flowing past the house. "It's so quiet here," Sarah Elizabeth said. "In town there was always noise, people talking, horses in the street, hammers banging. Here it's like the whole world is at peace." "That's one of the things I love about this place," Jake said. "Sometimes I sit out here in the evenings and feel like I'm the only person in the world." Sarah Elizabeth looked at him. "But you're not alone anymore." "No," Jake said quietly. "I'm not." The next few weeks passed quickly. Sarah Elizabeth threw herself into learning about ranch life. Jake taught her how to feed the chickens and collect their eggs. She learned to milk the cow and gather vegetables from the garden. She practiced cooking on the wood stove until she could make meals that were even better than Jake's simple cooking. Sarah Elizabeth was a quick learner, and she worked hard. By the end of the first week, she was doing most of the household chores. By the end of the second week, she was helping Jake with some of the outdoor work too. Jake was amazed by how much Sarah Elizabeth accomplished. The house had never been so clean and organized. The meals had never been so good. Even the chickens seemed happier under her care. But more than that, Jake realized he was happier too. It was wonderful to have someone to talk to at meals. It was nice to come in from a hard day of work and find the house warm and welcoming. It was good to share the small joys and challenges of each day with another person. Sarah Elizabeth seemed happy too. The worried, frightened look left her face. She gained weight and her skin got a healthy color from working in the sun. She laughed more often, and Jake realized she had a beautiful laugh. One evening, about 3 weeks after they had arrived at the ranch, they were sitting on the porch after dinner. Sarah Elizabeth was mending one of Jake's shirts, and Jake was oiling a piece of leather harness. "Jake," Sarah Elizabeth said suddenly, "I want to thank you again for everything you've done for me. I know I've said it before, but I don't think you understand how much it means to me." Jake looked up from his work. "You don't need to keep thanking me. You've more than earned your place here. This ranch runs better with you here than it ever did when I was alone." "But it's more than that," Sarah Elizabeth said. "You saved my life, Jake. If you hadn't helped me that day in town, I don't know what would have happened to me. I might have starved or frozen to death in that barn or done something even worse." Jake felt uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You would have figured something out. You're stronger than you think." "Maybe," Sarah Elizabeth said, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I'm glad you came along when you did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each thinking their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah Elizabeth spoke again. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked. "I used to," Jake replied honestly, "but not anymore." "I'm glad," Sarah Elizabeth said softly. "I don't feel lonely either, and I thought I always would after what happened with Thomas." Jake looked at her in the fading light. She was bent over her sewing, her brown hair falling around her face. She looked peaceful and content, like she belonged here. "Sarah Elizabeth," Jake said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about leaving? Going to another town maybe, or back to your family?" Sarah Elizabeth looked up from her sewing. "Do you want me to leave?" "No, Jake said quickly. Not at all. I was just wondering if you were happy here, or if you felt trapped. Sarah Elizabeth set down her sewing and looked out at the darkening valley. I've never been happier anywhere, she said. This feels like home to me in a way that Cedar Gulch never did. I feel useful here. I feel like I belong. Jake felt relief wash over him. I'm glad, because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Sarah Elizabeth smiled at him. Then it settled. I'm staying. But even as she said the words, Sarah Elizabeth wondered if it really was that simple. She was happy at the ranch, happier than she had ever been. But she was also aware that her feelings for Jake were changing. He was no longer just the kind stranger who had rescued her. He was becoming something more important to her, something she wasn't quite ready to name. And she could see that Jake's feelings were changing too. The way he looked at her sometimes, the way he smiled when she laughed, the way he seemed to find excuses to be near her when they were working on all of these things, told her that their relationship was becoming something different from what they had originally planned, but neither of them was ready to talk about these changes yet. They were both too scared of ruining the good thing they had built together. So they continued as they were, two people living together, helping each other, and pretending that their hearts weren't slowly becoming involved. As autumn approached, Sarah Elizabeth realized she had been at the ranch for almost 2 months. The time had passed so quickly that it seemed like only yesterday she had been a desperate woman, begging for bread outside Miller's store. Now she was a ranch woman, capable and strong, with a place where she belonged and work that mattered, but she also knew that the comfortable routine they had established was about to be tested. Winter was coming, and they would be spending long months trapped together in the house by snow and cold weather. Would their friendship survive the close quarters and isolation, or would the feelings that were growing between them finally come to the surface? The first snow came early that year. Sarah Elizabeth woke up one morning in late October to find the world outside her window covered in white. She had never seen anything so beautiful. The snow made everything look clean and peaceful, like a picture in a book. Snow already, Jake said when she came into the kitchen for breakfast. He was standing by the window drinking coffee and looking worried. Is that bad? Sarah Elizabeth asked. It's early, Jake said. Usually we don't get snow until November. An early winter means a long, hard winter. We need to make sure we have enough supplies to last. Sarah Elizabeth felt a flutter of worry. She had never lived through a winter on a ranch before. In town, when snow came, she could always walk to the store if she needed something. Here, they were miles from anywhere. What do we need to do? She asked. Jake made a list of all the things they had to finish before the winter got worse. They needed to cut more firewood. They needed to move the cattle to the winter pasture near the barn where they could feed them hay. They needed to make sure the root cellar was full of vegetables that wouldn't spoil. For the next 2 weeks, Jake and Sarah Elizabeth worked harder than they had ever worked before. They cut wood until their arms ached. They dug potatoes and carrots and stored them in the cool, dark cellar. They killed and preserved meat for the long months ahead. Sarah Elizabeth learned to do things she had never imagined herself doing. She helped Jake move heavy bales of hay. She learned to use an axe to split wood. She even helped him repair the barn roof before the snow could damage it. By the middle of November, they were ready for winter. The house was warm and well stocked with food. The animals were safe in the barn. Firewood was stacked high beside the house, but then the real storms began. The blizzard came on a Tuesday morning. Sarah Elizabeth woke up to howling wind and snow so thick she couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. The wind was so strong it shook the whole house. This is a bad one, Jake said, looking out at the storm. We won't be able to go outside until it stops. The blizzard lasted for 3 days. For 3 days, Sarah Elizabeth and Jake were trapped in the house together while the wind screamed outside and snow piled up against the windows. They kept the fire burning in the fireplace and cooked simple meals on the kitchen stove. At first, being trapped together felt strange. They had gotten used to having the whole ranch to move around in. Now they were stuck in a few small rooms with nowhere to go. But as the hours passed, they began to enjoy each other's company in a new way. They played card games by the fire. Sarah Elizabeth found some of Jake's mother's books and read stories out loud. Jake told her about his childhood and the adventures he had had as a boy. On the second night of the storm, Sarah Elizabeth noticed that Jake was shivering even though they were sitting close to the fire. Are you cold? She asked. A little, Jake said. This storm is colder than anything I've seen before. Sarah Elizabeth felt his forehead with her hand. It was burning hot. "Jake, you have a fever," she said with alarm. Jake tried to stand up, but he swayed and had to sit back down. "I feel dizzy," he admitted. Sarah Elizabeth's heart began to race with fear. Jake was sick, and they were trapped by the storm. There was no way to get help, no doctor to call. She was completely alone with a sick man, and she didn't know what to do. But then she took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Jake had taken care of her when she needed help. Now it was her turn to take care of him. She helped Jake to his bedroom and got him into bed. She piled all the blankets she could find on top of him, but he still shivered with cold. His fever was getting worse, and he started to ramble and say things that didn't make sense. Sarah Elizabeth had seen sickness like this before. When she was a child, her younger brother had gotten very sick with fever. Her mother had fought for days to save his life. Sarah Elizabeth remembered some of the things her mother had done. She made a tea from herbs she found in the kitchen. She cooled Jake's burning skin with wet cloths. She made him drink water even when he didn't want to. She stayed by his bed day and night, barely sleeping, watching over him like a guardian angel. For 2 days, Jake was very sick. Sometimes his fever was so high that he didn't know where he was. He called out for his parents, who had been dead for 5 years. He talked to people who weren't there. Once he grabbed Sarah Elizabeth's hand and begged her not to leave him. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, holding his hot hand in both of hers. "I'm right here." Sarah Elizabeth was terrified that Jake might die. She realized that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she had fallen in love with this kind, quiet man. The thought of losing him made her heart feel like it was breaking. She prayed like she had never prayed before. She promised God that if Jake got better, she would be the best wife and partner a man could ask for. She would love him and take care of him for the rest of her life. On the 3rd night, Jake's fever finally broke. Sarah Elizabeth was dozing in a chair beside his bed when she heard him speak her name clearly. "Sarah Elizabeth?" His voice was weak, but it made sense. She opened her eyes and saw that he was looking at her. His eyes were clear for the first time in days. "Jake," she said, relief flooding through her. "How do you feel?" "Terrible," he said with a weak smile. "But better. What happened?" Sarah Elizabeth told him about the fever and how sick he had been. As she talked, she realized she was crying. All the fear and worry of the past few days came pouring out of her. "I was so scared," she sobbed. "I thought you were going to die. I didn't know what to do. I've never taken care of anyone who was that sick before." Jake reached up with a shaky hand and wiped the tears from her face. "You saved my life," he said softly. "I remember some of it. I remember you being there, taking care of me. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Sarah Elizabeth said fiercely. "Of course I did. She stopped herself before she said the words that were in her heart. But Jake heard them anyway, even though she didn't speak them out loud. Something had changed between them during those long, frightening days. The wall they had built to keep their relationship simple and practical had come tumbling down. "Sarah Elizabeth," Jake said quietly, "I need to tell you something. While I was sick, I kept thinking I was going to die without ever telling you how I really feel about you." Sarah Elizabeth's heart began to beat faster. "Jake, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Jake interrupted. "I love you, Sarah Elizabeth. I know we said this would just be 2 people helping each other, but somewhere along the way it became much more than that. At least for me." Sarah Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. "For me too," she whispered. "I love you too, Jake. I think I have for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it." Jake tried to sit up, but he was still too weak. Sarah Elizabeth gently pushed him back down on the pillow. "Rest now," she said. "We have plenty of time to talk about this when you're feeling stronger." But Jake held onto her hand. "I need to say this now while I have the courage. Sarah Elizabeth, will you marry me? Really marry me, not just live here as my helper?" Sarah Elizabeth's heart felt like it might burst with happiness. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake smiled, and for the first time in days he looked truly peaceful. "Good," he said, "because I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else." As Jake drifted off to sleep, Sarah Elizabeth sat beside his bed and thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate woman in a torn wedding dress begging for bread. Now she was a woman in love, about to marry a man who loved her in return. The blizzard was finally ending. Through the bedroom window, she could see that the snow had stopped falling and the wind was getting quieter. Soon the storm would be over and they would dig their way out into a bright, clean world. But the real storm, the storm in their hearts, had already passed. They had found each other, and they had found love. The rest of the winter, no matter how long or cold it might be, would be full of warmth and joy. Sarah Elizabeth looked down at Jake's sleeping face. Even sick and pale, he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. But more than that, he was good and kind and honest. Everything Thomas had pretended to be but never was. She thought about Thomas now without anger or sadness. If he hadn't run away, if he hadn't left her alone and desperate in Cedar Gulch, she never would have met Jake. Sometimes, she thought, the worst things that happen to you lead to the best things in your life. As dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, Sarah Elizabeth finally allowed herself to sleep. She dreamed of spring, when they would have a real wedding with flowers and sunshine. She dreamed of children playing in the stream and growing old with Jake by her side. The lonely cowboy had found his bride, and the desperate woman had found her home. Winter was only half over, but their real life together was just beginning. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it the most beautiful weather Sarah Elizabeth had ever seen. The snow melted away to reveal green grass and wild flowers. The stream ran full and clear with fresh water from the mountains. Birds returned to build nests in the trees around the house. Jake had gotten his strength back slowly during the long winter months. Sarah Elizabeth had nursed him back to health with love and patience. By the time the snow began to melt, he was strong enough to do all his regular work around the ranch. But more important than his physical health was what had grown between them during those cold, quiet months. Their love had deepened and strengthened like roots growing deep into rich soil. They had learned to talk to each other about everything, their fears, their dreams, their plans for the future. They had also learned to work together as true partners. During the winter, when Jake was still weak, Sarah Elizabeth had taken on many of the harder jobs around the ranch. She had learned to care for the cattle and repair broken tools. Jake had been amazed by how capable and strong she was. "You're not the same woman I found begging for bread outside Miller's store," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "No," Sarah Elizabeth agreed. "That woman was broken and scared. This woman has found her strength. I'm proud of you," Jake said, "and I'm lucky to have you." As spring turned toward summer, they began to make plans for their wedding. It would be simple, just the two of them and maybe the pastor from Cedar Gulch if he was willing to make the long trip to the ranch. Sarah Elizabeth didn't need a big celebration. She just wanted to be Jake's wife in the eyes of God and the law. But their quiet plans were interrupted one hot day in late May. Sarah Elizabeth was working in the vegetable garden when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming down the hill toward the ranch. Her heart stopped when she recognized the man in front. It was Thomas Whitmore. Sarah Elizabeth dropped her basket of vegetables and ran toward the house. "Jake," she called. "Jake, come quick." Jake came running out of the barn carrying a pitchfork. When he saw the riders, his face got hard and angry. He set down the pitchfork and walked to stand beside Sarah Elizabeth, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Thomas rode up to the house and stopped a few feet away from them. He looked different than Sarah Elizabeth remembered. He was thinner, and his face had a mean, desperate look. The 2 men with him looked like the kind of people who would do anything for money. "Hello, Sarah Elizabeth," Thomas said with a cold smile. "You're looking well. Ranch life agrees with you." "What do you want, Thomas?" Sarah Elizabeth asked. Her voice was steady, but Jake could feel her trembling beside him. "I want you to come back with me," Thomas said. "You're my bride, remember?" "We have unfinished business," Jake stepped forward. "She's not your bride," he said firmly. "She's going to be my wife. You need to leave now." Thomas laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Your wife? You stole her from me, cowboy. I've come to take back what's mine." "I'm not yours," Sarah Elizabeth said, finding her courage. "I was never yours. A real man doesn't steal money from his own family. A real man doesn't run away when things get hard." Thomas's face got red with anger. "I had problems, but I've solved them now. The men I owed money to are dead. I don't need to hide anymore. I can come back to Cedar Gulch and start over." "With what money?" Sarah Elizabeth asked. "You can't give back what you stole from the bank." "That's where you come in," Thomas said with his cold smile. "You're going to tell everyone that you lied about me. You're going to say you made up the story about me stealing money because you were angry that I left you at the altar." Sarah Elizabeth stared at him in shock. I'll never do that. It would be a lie. You did steal that money. But no one can prove it now, Thomas said. The only witness was you. If you say you lied, people will believe you. They want to believe you lied. It will make them feel better about how they treated you. Jake had heard enough. Get off my land, he said, his voice like steel. And don't come back. Thomas looked at the two men who had come with him. They were both armed and looked ready for trouble. I don't think you understand the situation, Cowboy. I'm not leaving without Sarah Elizabeth. Yes, you are, Jake said. He didn't raise his voice, but there was something in his tone that made even the hired men look nervous. Thomas pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. I have a warrant here for Sarah Elizabeth's arrest. It says she helped me steal the money from the bank. The sheriff in Cedar Gulch signed it. Sarah Elizabeth gasped. That's a lie. I never helped you steal anything. Maybe, Thomas said. But it's your word against mine. And I have witnesses who will say they saw you coming and going from the bank at strange hours. Jake knew Thomas was lying, but he also knew that lies could be very powerful when the people hearing them wanted to believe them. The people of Cedar Gulch had treated Sarah Elizabeth badly. It would be easier for them to believe she was guilty than to admit they had been wrong. Even if that warrant is real, Jake said carefully, you're not a sheriff. You can't arrest anyone. But he can, Thomas said, pointing to one of his companions. The man pulled back his coat to show a sheriff's badge pinned to his shirt. Meet Sheriff Carson from the next county over. He's agreed to help me bring Sarah Elizabeth back to face justice. Jake looked at the badge, but something didn't look right about it. The metal was too shiny, too new. Let me see that warrant, he said. Thomas handed him the paper. Jake read it carefully. He had seen legal documents before, and this one didn't look right either. The writing was sloppy, and there was no official seal. This is fake, Jake said, handing the paper back. And I bet that badge is fake too. The man pretending to be a sheriff put his hand on his gun. Are you calling me a liar? Yes, Jake said simply. I am. Sarah Elizabeth could see that the situation was getting dangerous. These men had come here to take her away, and they were willing to use force to do it. She couldn't let Jake get hurt because of her. It's all right, Jake, she said quietly. I'll go with them. Jake looked at her in shock. No, absolutely not. I have to, Sarah Elizabeth said. I won't let them hurt you. I'll go back to Cedar Gulch and prove that Thomas is lying. You're not going anywhere, Jake said firmly. He turned back to Thomas. You have 3 seconds to get off my property. After that, I start shooting. Thomas looked uncertain for the first time since he had arrived. He had expected Sarah Elizabeth to come quietly, and he had expected Jake to back down when faced with 3 armed men. He hadn't expected such fierce resistance.